My extreme left is Jason Marshall. He is a practitioner in applied behavioral analysis for the last 15 years. He's been in practice. He specializes in severe behaviors, other people's, not his own. And he has a beautiful wife and 2 kids that he uses the ABA techniques with quite often, apparently. Marlene Viray, yes, thank you, I got it. 4 years with direct service, is completing her master's degree right now. The reason we tap Marlene, of course, is because she knows Colin personally and has worked with Colin. How long did you work with Colin? 2 years? Something like that, 2 years. 2 wonderful years until we lost her. She's just come back from Puerto Vallarta, so she's still on vacation mode. Next to her is Gretchen Grunden. Yeah, okay. MA, BC, BA. Did I get that right? Okay, good. She is both a parent trainer and a manager supervising something or other. Yeah, manager with Verbal Behavior Associates. Special education background and autism since 2001. Hi, buddy. How you doing? And has 2 daughters, 2 lovely daughters, the youngest of which has been diagnosed with autism. So she knows us like we know, like we know our situation. Sitting next to her is Matt Howarth, and Dr. Matt Howarth. Also a PhD, BCBA. It's important to have more letters behind you than in your last name. He's the president and CEO of Verbal Behavior Associates. Has been providing services for 15 years, ABA services. Has published 2 comprehensive studies, I believe on language skills, and is the former district supervisor for San Diego City Schools for, I'll just have him fill that in. So these guys are the experts. I'm going to start off with just a couple of questions and pass the mic, and then it's up to you guys to ask the questions that you most have. So, first question to anybody, what is ABA and what are its essential elements?
Well, for those of you who don't know, applied behavior analysis is the science of human behavior as it applies to learning and other behavioral situations. The key elements of the behavior of behavior analysis are arranging the environment to promote the behaviors that you'd like to see. One of the more powerful things we look at is parents' involvement, parent reaction to behavior, how you respond, and optimizing the environment to promote the skills in children that we'd like to see, or adults. It's used for children with disabilities, but it's also useful in businesses with typical developing individuals, for governments. It's really the science of human behavior.
Yeah, please add.
So when you look at the breakdown of the term applied behavior analysis, when we're looking at the applied portion, we're looking at making changes to behaviors that are going to be socially significant and socially relevant to individuals. We want to make sure that we're teaching functional skills that are really going to make a difference in the lives of people that we work with. And when you look at behavior, we're looking at like specific skills. So what exactly are we trying to improve and what are we trying to reduce in the case of the presence of inappropriate behaviors. And then the analysis part comes in is that this is what kind of sets ABA aside from other practices, is that there's a strong data collection component. So we're watching really, really carefully to see how the programs that we're putting in places for students and children and adults and anyone who's taking part in the programs are actually changing, and then analyzing the data to make sure that the progress for the child is going in the direction that we want it to go. And if it's not, then it's up to us to figure out why not, and then to make changes so that we can maximize learning for the kids.
Outstanding. That's great. So yeah, that was a very you are correct, Gretchen. Very good. Your next question.
$100.
Who is ABA most effective with, and what kind of syndromes or disorders do you use ABA with?
Well, I would say that ABA is effective with every learner, every person. Personally, I've used it often with kids on an autism spectrum, but also 1P kiddos. I've used it with my own children. I've used it with general ed kids. Pretty much any population, any age range, dealing with, again, socially significant behaviors. Not teaching party tricks, but actually teaching skills that kids need, or adults, to be more free, to be able to do the things they want to do and that their families want to do.
Another important part is that ABA is actually one of the only evidence-based approaches to teaching kids with autism. So to target those behaviors with something that we have scientific evidence to back up tells us that we can help you and we can ask you questions, we get information from you, and then it helps you in a way where we reflect on what you tell us you want. So it's socially valid, right? It helps you in ways that you've identified for us. These are the issues that, can you hear me now? Yeah, these are the issues that we want you to focus on. Oh no.
Just hold it right to it.
Yes. Is that better? Oh, excellent. Okay.
Sing.
So from the beginning, ABA is evidence-based, so it's not, it's one of the approaches to teaching kids with autism that has scientific evidence to back it up. And the way that we apply that to you is by asking you for your input. What exactly can we apply this to? What issues is going to help you the most as a family? And what kind of culture do you have in your family? What are your values? And in those ways, we can apply the evidence-based approaches to help you.
Speaking of evidence-based, what is the research base for ABA? Where does it come from? How did it evolve?
Well, ABA has been around for almost 100 years, really. The science started at the university level. You've probably heard of B.F. Skinner, but it even preceded B.F. Skinner's work. One of the more groundbreaking studies, which is why actually we're sitting in this room, I think, was done at UCLA by Ivar Lovaas, demonstrating that with intensive instruction, children on the spectrum could make significant gains that optimized their lives and led to better outcomes for them throughout their lives. And that study's since been replicated thousands of times in a variety of settings and locations. Building on the previous question, ABA isn't just about autism. It just happens to be children whose parents have gotten together for the autism community. They seem to have the strongest parent group that's gotten out there and advocated for their children. So we often see in our field is children obtaining diagnoses for autism in order to access ABA services. So it's a powerful intervention, but it is not just specific to autism.
Actually, yeah, that was going to be my next question. Is that what if our child does not have autism? Their primary diagnosis may be 1P36, but they do have autistic features, which I think is prevalent in about 52% of our kids. Is ABA still appropriate for him or her?
I mean, just to kind of piggyback on what Jason was saying, it really can be effective for anyone who wants to learn anything. And like Matt was saying, we use ABA strategies all the time in everyday world, in running a business, in working with employees, working with staff, working with gen ed populations. So I think really what it comes down to is doing an intensive ABA program for a child, and as a parent, I feel like I can speak to this because my child is in an intensive ABA program. It's a lot of work, and if you're willing to put the work in, you're going to see results because it's all about finding what works. So if you try one strategy and it doesn't work and you have a strong practitioner that you're working with, what they're going to do is say, okay, well, that didn't work, so let's try something else and figure it out. So I would say that, yes, it could be effective, but you also have to, make sure that you're ready to put the effort into.
Yeah, because I was just going to say, for the folks, how many people here have actually had ABA services for their child? Okay, so fair number. Yes, I see you, Jen. Hello. You kidding me? I'm living it every day. Julie, I see you. Yes, of course. How many people have never even heard of ABA before today? Okay. Yeah. So it's like half and half, right? So for the folks that are out there who have no experience with ABA, what kind of progress can they expect? Like what progress can they expect?
Just to kind of add on to the end of that, one of the things that I've found with this particular diagnosis is that it is similar to autism when we're talking about services. Any behavior change
Right up to the mouth.
up to my mouth. Any behavior change is going to be easier when you're starting younger. If you think about the number of skills that a typically developing 2-year-old has when compared to a non-typically developing 2-year-old, the difference isn't that great. So it's easier to make progress than the younger the child, the fewer bad habits they may have developed. So it's always easier when they're younger, and progress is made. It can be made with older kids, it just takes longer. I feel like it's a little more painful sometimes, but it's absolutely possible.
Okay, just kind of related to that, because a lot of behaviors take place in the classroom. Can an ABA provider observe a child in the classroom, and what sort of interaction do you get to have with the faculty or the staff?
Do you want me to speak to that? Okay, so so like he was saying before, I was a parent trainer for my company, but my background also is as a special ed teacher, and more recently, for 4 years, I've been overseeing ABA programs for a school district. So, and also Matt has a lot of experience with that. So we provide different kinds of models. One of our models would be like a kind of like what you're asking about would be a more consultation model where we'd go into a classroom, we'd observe a student having specific behaviors, kind of look at what the situation surrounding the behavior. So what's going on right before the behaviors are happening? What's going on after? What kind of skills do we think that the child might be missing? What kind of strengths do they have? And then we can develop a plan for improved behaviors based on the child's strengths and what they need to learn as far as like what's developmentally appropriate.
And then in order to go into a school, you really have to be careful. The best way to do it is to talk to the case manager or the child's teacher and ask if you can bring in a consultant or do an observation. When things are approached collaboratively, you can get results quicker. If they are resistant, that's when you may find yourself in an IEP meeting kind of fighting for these types of services. There's a whole gamut, and my recommendation is contacting the district and finding out if they have a BCBA that's already working for the district is a good place to start. And then asking your case manager if it's okay to bring in your home provider to do an observation to collaborate.
Okay, so it's primarily observation and consultation in that if you're coming from an outside service.
That's the place to start. If services are more intensive are needed, it's up to the IEP team to determine if those services are needed. And then ABA providers can be contracted through the school district from outside agencies. But the district themselves may also have ABA services that they provide.
Right. Jason, did you have something to add?
I was just going to add to that if the collaborative approach is taken, at least in the school districts in the Central Valley, we've had a lot of luck with the districts, the IEP team recognizing that even if they have a BCBA on staff, maybe that individual's caseload is too heavy, maybe they don't have the time, and most of the school districts are open to working with the in-home agency. The thing that goes wrong is if you're not flexible. If you come in, if you're going to demand that the school do everything the same way that you're doing it at home, a lot of times schools are not going to be open to that for a lot of reasons. So if you get that first step of you can bring a home provider to the school setting, take that as a win and be willing to negotiate some of the other.
Okay. The next question I had was about age range as to where this is appropriate. Is ABA? I mean, the rumor on the Google net is that it's more effective with younger children than older children. Is that true?
Yeah, I don't know that it's not a definitive thing. I know it's easier. You have more time. If you're starting with younger kids, you have more time to change behavior. You have more time to teach things. So if the earlier you start, the more time you have to work. With my caseload, we concern ourselves a lot with what we call learning history. How long has the problem been a problem? And how well does it work for the kid? How efficient is it for the family, for the child? The more efficient it is, then the harder it's going to be to change. The older the kid, the more behaviors like that they're likely to have established. But we've seen great progress with individuals of all ages. We work with a number of geriatric clients, and we're still teaching stuff, teaching them to manage their own medication, teaching them to schedule their own doctor's appointments. So I've seen progress in all age ranges.
I've worked with, I'm a therapist, so I do the in-home one-on-one therapy, and my position would be working underneath one of these guys, giving me guidance and making programs for me to follow. And I've followed those programs for kids starting at 18 months of age all the way up to 23 years of age, and I see progress in all of our clients. The biggest thing, I think we talked about this already, is parent involvement and getting everybody on board. You know, we can, if the schools are willing to work with us, we definitely want to reach out to them. I think the biggest impact you can have is by having everybody in the child's family provide the same kind of consistent responses and the same kind of support. ABA can be effective for all age groups.
The main difference with the age groups is what goals you focus on. So with a younger child, you might be working on some basic self-help skills, some functional communication skills. As the individual gets older, you're going to be working on leisure activities, daily living skills. How are they going to make themselves a sandwich? Do they know how to call someone on the telephone? Identifying what are those skills that will make them most independent. And I would say also that with the younger children, we focus more on the skill deficits and trying to remediate those. Whereas children get older, we focus on accommodating and making them more successful with the skills that they do have. So trying to optimize their environment in that way.
I have a particular issue that I need to solve. When the ABA therapist is in my house and working with Colin, and you'll notice Colin's not in the room right now because he's acting out. When the therapist is in the house and working directly one-on-one with him, no problem. Can get him to do almost anything and follow the routine, the program. Literally the moment the car pulls out of the driveway and the therapist is gone, Colin is acting out, he's pulling hair, he's knocking furniture over and all that kind of stuff. So I don't know if there's a question or whether I'm just venting. But I guess the question would be, what helps with that transition? Because just like anywhere else, like the people you're closest with are the ones you act out the most with. So any recommendations there?
Yeah, you bring up a common occurrence. Number one, my question for you would be, how much do you participate in the ABA sessions?
I live them. As a matter of fact,
you're in them and you run the programs.
We are in the programs. It depends. It depends on what's going on. We have 2 other children and a life of 3-ring circus. So I would say, and not unlike every other family here, I would say. But I would say, yeah, we participate. We do the parent coaching and all of that.
So going back to the research component, the kind of groundbreaking study on the interventions for children, it was a 40-hour-a-week program, but 20 hours of those were the parent delivering the direct service themselves. So in order to get the outcomes, you really need to master the training. So that's actually one of the things that Gretchen could speak to further. We have training tools for parents where we actually have them implement the behavior plan with their child and take data on the parent doing it accurately and consistently until the child shows mastery with the parent. That's important. The other piece there is the amount of interaction your child is getting while they're getting instruction drops as soon as that therapist leaves. So it's finding ways to keep your child engaged in reinforcing activities and keeping them on task is one of the components that you're facing. And then the third piece is, and this is not to be critical of anyone, is that the skills don't sound like they're mastered yet. So if I will perform in one setting but not the other, I wouldn't say that that skill is mastered. So going back to the teaching, I would focus more on working on those skills till they generalize.
Yeah. Any follow-up?
I think that's a really good point, and I think, like, just speaking from a parent's perspective, like, I have a couple hats that I wear. So I wear my ABA hat when I'm working with the child, and I'm doing everything exactly the way that the books say to do it, and then I put my mom hat on, and I'm on the phone trying, like, I think one time I was talking to him on the phone, and my daughter was throwing some kind of tantrum, and I just needed to focus on work for a minute, and I said, just fine, go get a piece of candy, it's fine. And, he's just like, did you just give your child candy for having a tantrum? Like, so, but as parents, we do those kinds of things, and when we have an intensive ABA program, so like the one that you're talking about, like running with kids, what they're getting is like a consistent access to reinforcement based on what you want them to do, meaning, like, in common terms, they're being asked to do something, and then you're rewarding them for doing what you want to do really consistently. The strongest form of reinforcement is intermittent, which means that you don't actually know for sure when it's coming. And a lot of times, the reinforcement coming from parents is a lot more intermittent than the reinforcement coming, or a consequence coming from an instructor. So for your child, if one time you gave in to him when he was bothering you on the phone and gave him candy, he might think every single time that I throw a tantrum, my mom might give me candy. So they're going to just keep trying. So in the program, there's probably a lot more consistency, whereas in daily life, it's a lot harder to continue on with that kind of consistency. I mean, we do the best we can, but it's not always realistic to be.
Yeah, because I can tell you right now, like 20 hours of intensive training a week. I don't know about you guys, but I don't have 20 hours. I mean, and I also got other kids, so it's a little hard to do.
So I think following up on that, that's the textbook model. That's kind of, if you've got a young kid, if you're doing the 25 plus hour a week program, one of the things that we've implemented as to address this exact problem, when you're describing your son, pulling hair and kind of starting the behavior excesses immediately when the door closes, that happens with a lot of our kids like clockwork. It's a form of what we call stimulus control. When I'm there, when I'm present, the kid knows what's going to happen when he behaves. When I leave, it's not so sure. So he'll start trying things that wouldn't work if I was present. But I can't live there. Despite the number of parents who have offered to give me a guest room, I can't live in everyone's house. And so one of the strategies that we've used that's proven to be pretty effective is that instead of leaving it up to the parents to be intermittent reinforcers, I make myself less predictable. So I will end session maybe half an hour early, and I will walk out to my car and drive around the block, and then mom texts me, okay, it's starting. And then I show back up. And the first couple times, there's usually surprise. We were done, you left, why did you come back? I'm not supposed to see you until tomorrow. But we do that for maybe a week, and I vary the time I show up and when I stay, and if I come back later in the day. And it seems to soften some of the explosiveness when I don't stop doing it until the family's reporting that we're not having those problems when I leave anymore. But then we also start switching staff members, new faces are showing up, and we try to make it as unpredictable. Once the behavior skills have been trained and taught, we try to make our presence as unpredictable as possible for the kid so that they kind of need to behave all the time because they never know who's going to show up when.
So, I think when we hear about a lot of therapies, I'm sure, right? For 1P36, because the area is so kind of ill-defined, and some of our kids have autistic features, some of them don't. So we hear about a lot of therapies quite often. So I got to ask you some basic questions about how it works. Is there any risk to the child? Is there anything that could be dangerous in this process?
No.
I guess that was a closed-ended question, wasn't it?
I got nothing else to add. There's no no potential harm. No, I mean, if you have unskilled practitioners, if you have people who, I run into a lot of people who call themselves behavior therapists or behavioral counselors who aren't practicing ABA. They might have taken a short workshop. They might have watched some YouTube videos. If they're calling the shots on your behavior intervention plans, of course there could be side effects. They might not know what they're doing. But if you have a board-certified behavior analyst, if you have a reputable practitioner in your home, then there's no downside to ABA other than the workload, other than the commitment and the consistency required from the families. That's tough. But if you're all in, then it'll be nothing but positive.
And going along with that, the part of the certification process for, I hate microphones. I'm sorry.
You don't
It makes
have
me
to speak
I have
lower,
a really
you
loud
know.
voice without one, so I'm always awkward with microphones. We have a pretty high ethical code that we have to follow as a part of our licensure. And ensuring safety of the individual is like at the very, very top of the ethical code. So we do deal with children that can have very potentially dangerous behaviors, but we're always going to be choosing the intervention that yields the most safety first and foremost for the child. Even if that intervention might take a little longer to get to your end goal, we always are thinking about safety first.
And how I would describe ABA to those of you who don't know what it is it's repeated practice. It's really it's a science, but we're really going to grind it out. It's a lot of work. We're not going to come in and do something really quick and leave and the problem is gone. We are going to practice the skill over and over and over and over again until we get there.
So you're saying you don't have any magic wand? Is that what you're saying?
There is no magic
Damn
wand.
it.
The only
Okay,
way to learn how
fine.
to hit a baseball is to take thousands and thousands of swings, or to play an instrument is to practice for hours and hours and hours. If anybody's selling you a shortcut, I'd be very suspicious. There's very little scientific evidence out there for a lot of the therapies you'll hear advertised.
Phrenology is not a good idea for these kids. Okay, good. So just, oh yeah, please.
When we are assessing risk that might be present in one of our intervention programs, we can also perform a risk-benefit analysis. So we're thinking about, yes, there might be risks here, but there are also a lot of benefits that you stand to gain from this. You know, what skills can we teach? What behaviors can we address? And when we perform that risk-benefit analysis, we're asking you, what's important to you? And if you are always the one who decides if we implement a program or not. So you are, the risk is in your hands.
So with the drills and the programs and stuff like that, are you turning my kid into a robot? I mean, are they just going to be response, stimulus, response? What's going on there?
Okay, another closed-ended, no. I think that a really, really quality ABA program, and I was actually talking to another one of my colleagues, has a component to it that where you're fading off the level of service needed, and someone who's a really, really skilled practitioner or a parent who's really strong in being able to implement the principles can be using the principles, and somebody who's watching from the outside wouldn't even know what they're doing if you have fluidity in implementing the programs. Because, and this kind of speaks to your other question, I mean, the most powerful programming for a child is going to be delivered across environments. So you're not always going to be sitting at a table practicing a drill over and over and over again, especially for individuals we're working on developing life skills. Like if you're working on dressing, you're in the bedroom looking for those clothes in the dresser and practicing the strategies in that environment. So I think there is definitely, you have to be mindful about how your program is going to go and generalize to other environments, meaning that the skills that you learn in one environment, you can use them in another setting or another environment with different people. that answer your question?
It sure does. Okay, he's not going to be a robot. Okay, good.
No,
I
no
wanted
robots.
to know that. I wanted to know that. So you've touched upon this a little bit earlier, but if one were to go shopping for an ABA therapist or practitioner, what qualities and qualifications should they be looking for?
Well, as Jason had mentioned, the first thing you want to look for is that it's supervised by a board-certified behavior analyst. And then the second question I would ask is how frequently my child is going to see that BCBA. That's the acronym, Board Certified Behavior Analyst. The ethical board gives a recommendation of about 1 hour of supervision for every 10 hours of service. So we generally see children about once a week for 2 hours is my recommendation.
So the person providing the service is not necessarily the BCBA.
The other thing that you want to look for is a program that does have a strong parent training component to it, because you want to make sure that as a parent, you are going to be the number one teacher for your child, because no matter how many hours a week somebody is coming into your home and working with your child, or they're going to school, you're still going to be the one that's going to be there, that's going to need to know how to respond to behaviors, both good and bad. So if there isn't a parent training component to the program, I would just walk away, because that's really going to be the biggest key for you, is to be able to learn how to use the skills yourself and implement them with your child. Do you have anything you want to add?
Well, speaking of the parent training, one of the questions was going to be, can parents learn the principles and the practices and apply them ourselves, short of becoming a BCBA?
Yes.
I love these close-ended questions.
I think it's a process, and I think, like, as parents, we really need to. I mean, we need to adjust to, we love our kids, and we want to be able to provide them the best life possible. So I think it's important for us to be able to learn how to use the strategies that are going to most impact their ability to reach their greatest potential and be successful. Like Matt was saying, it's a lot of work. I obviously have a lot of experience in this field, and it's been a totally different experience having someone else come into my home and tell me what I should be doing with my child. And that's, it's
we
kind of weird.
love that, by the way,
So,
telling us, and don't do that. You're doing it wrong. I mean, we really enjoy when people say that to us, right?
So I think it's all about building a positive relationship with the person that's going to be coaching you, so that you're comfortable and that you trust them, and that you feel like you're able to share what your successes are and what your areas of need for yourself are. But I think I've seen a lot of parents who don't have any background in ABA, who've never heard of ABA, become incredible role models for their kids. So.
Is that some of the parents who've gone through programs that I've worked in, by the time they're done, but programs terminated, we've met all the goals for their child, I've wanted to offer those parents jobs, because they've been through so much training and they've been through so much experience. And if you're hiring kids out of college who haven't worked with children before, there's a big learning curve there. So parents who spend and I think sometimes we lose track. We work with your children 8-10 hours a day, and then we go home and you've still got a lot of hours left with your kids. So there's a toughness to parents that you can't replicate. I can't hire someone and train them how to work with your kid, as well as I can just teach you a couple of tricks and let you take over with your kid. You're going to be the most effective intervention agent with a little bit of support from us.
So for the families, I've been in this field for only 4 years, and I've only seen a couple families, what we call graduate from the program. And they're not graduating because we've solved all of their problems. They're graduating because we've taught them strategies that they can apply to the new problems that they're encountering. We're not solving everything for them. We're getting them to a place where they can solve it for themselves.
Okay, any other comments on that? Okay, the last question that I have is, are there any complementary or alternative therapies that either enhance or go with ABA?
Speech and language services would be top on the list. Your child's ability to communicate functionally is directly related to their behavior. So the more language, the more ability you have to independently navigate the environment, the less problem behavior you're going to need. So speech services are very complementary. I'd also say special education services that you're going to get through your school district are very important. Many of the other services can be complementary. You just want to be selective in how you choose. Maybe Gretchen has more.
I was also thinking about physical services like OT and PT, especially if your child has a physical disability as a part of their diagnosis. Because I think that, like Matt was sharing, with a lack of communication can come behaviors. But with lack of motor skills, a lot of school and a lot of life has to do with being able to complete motor tasks. I mean, young kids in a preschool are expected to be able to play with Legos and use a crayon on paper. And if you have a motor delay and you're not able to participate in activities like that because you are missing a skill, behaviors can come out. So I agree that you can collaborate with lots of different agencies and different therapists. You just want to be, careful and make sure everybody's on the same page.
Okay, and speaking of things coming out, as we've talked, my son's stomach button has come out. How many people have G-tubes here? Okay. Do you guys have your emergency kits with you at all? Okay. Can you go see my wife? She's probably in the G-Care Center. She needs probably a 6 milliliter syringe and maybe some of the lubricant. And God forbid we're missing the button. There we go. To the rescue. 2 moms taking on the world. Okay. So that's parenting in action right there. Okay, I'm going to open up the floor. We have about 20 minutes or so. Who has questions for our ABA therapists? Okay, I will come back here, and we will pass the mic around.
This is kind of in line with what you guys were just talking about. We do PRT therapy, and I wondered if you guys had touched on the difference between PRT and some of the other forms.
I'm not sure I would make a firm distinction between PRT and what we've been... I think with young kids, a lot of ABA services look like what we would call discrete trial training, which is sitting at a table and repeating stuff over and over. In our autism programs and a lot of our special ed programs, PRT was just an extension of that. So, okay, I'm sorry. So PRT is pivotal response training or teaching, and it's most commonly used to expand language skills and initiation skills for communication or for turn taking, playing with toys, that sort of thing. So in my mind, PRT is ABA. The founders, the developers were behavior analysts, are behavior analysts, they're still around. So yeah, there might be some behavior analysts who don't practice PRT, but I think it's definitely within the skill set of, or should be for most of us.
So another difference, like Jason was saying, PRT is a form of ABA. And when you look at the difference between like a discrete trial, which would be just drill instruction, like you give a direction, the child follows it, a consequence follows that. PRT is typically done in a more natural environment, and the reinforcers are a little different. So like with a discrete trial program, the reinforcer is often external to the activity. So it might be an edible, a token, a sticker, like something that doesn't actually have to do with the toy or activity that the person is doing. So in PRT, the materials that you're using for instruction are actually the motivator. So if the child's practicing communicating in a naturalistic setting, they may be requesting for, the red puzzle piece. The reward is the red puzzle piece. So they're very, very tied together. It's just kind of like the setting and the way that the reinforcement is delivered.
Okay, thank you. Other questions? All right, Julie, I'm coming.
I have a question. I don't know if it even makes sense. I have an older daughter, 22, behaviors, but also, and we've done therapy and stuff all her life and things, but, you know, and I've never done this ABA therapy. I've heard a little bit about it. My question is, okay, I know it's family involved and all that, but I don't know if any of you guys have. My daughter is very in tune with me. So, like, to listen to dad is not going to, it is a battle, or brother. So it's me. So it's, you know, and that's already our battles already too, which she loves them, and it's like, and sometimes it changes some. So I'm thinking therapy and when we're all together, but it's also if you only have one person that, you know what I mean, kind of listens to you, and if not, then it's a screaming match and it's like nothing matters. And it's like, how do you stop that when you have your own family? And like, say when we walk in, things will be great when you said and you got, hey, we're great and happy, and nobody knows we have attitude, and then we walk in the house, and then, excuse me, it's like, and dad's there, brother's there, and mom, you know, and then somebody will say something, but nobody listens, and then it's me, and there's a catch there. So you got your family, but it's like when you got somebody that just works with one person behavior, like school would never do anything or out in public, but it's like, so is that something that could help me even we're 22? You know what I mean? Help with dealing with families, like, I mean, it's her dad and her family, we're all together, do you know what I'm saying? But it's like...
Yes, that's not abnormal in households, and it puts a lot of the burden on you, which is what I think you're expressing, is that the first thing we do, and this would apply to your situation, is with every new individual that comes into the home to work with the child, the first thing we do is try to establish that person as somebody the child wants to be with. So that's where I would start with your husband, is if you could look at it as just working on the relationship. Find some activities that your daughter likes to do and have him spend time just doing them with her until she wants to be with him on a consistent basis. That would be the first place to start. The other thing that's probably going on is you're very consistent in your directions, I would guess, and you follow through with the things that you say. So I would say with your daughter and your husband, if he asks her to do something, he should follow through with those directions. I would start with small, easy things that she enjoys, and then work up to demands. If every time she sees him, he says, go unload the dishwasher, you know, that's where you're going to have a problem.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm new to the ABA thing. I haven't really heard too much about it, but so I have like 2 or 3 questions in one. My daughter's 8, but when she was younger and she had the speech development, wasn't being able to communicate, she would start doing a little bit of the pinching or the hurting and that kind of thing. And then as her speech got better and she gradually gained few words, that stopped. Now we're at that delay part again where she's not picking up as many words again. And I think that's where it's coming from, is she's starting to do the pinching. She can't get across what she wants. But so basically before it gets to a worse point, or however I would word that, before it gets worse, basically, what would be the first step in, because me just telling her, no, don't do that, she'll laugh, or it's funny to her, or she'll do it again, or whatever. So what would be the first step in stopping that before it gets worse? And to start the ABA, would that be a good service for that? Or how do I start that? Or is that something completely different, related?
So, yes, your child's behavior is related to language, which you're confirming. Each individual has a finite capacity for how many skills they're going to necessarily acquire. So the benefit of ABA in this situation would be to figure out why she's doing it. All of our behavior is lawful. There's a reason we respond the way we do in different environments. To sum it up in a really simplistic way, we're either doing things to gain something or get away from something. So the first question you want to ask is, when does she pinch?
Okay.
and when does that occur, and then what happens following the pinch.
Okay.
So if she's doing it to access a tangible, might be one example of why she would be doing it. To access your attention might be another.
I think part of it is like when I tell her no, she can't do something, then that's the one thing she wants, but she's not going to get it, and she knows she's not going to get it, and that's when I think it kind of comes from that part of it.
So it's to access something.
Okay.
So then you can develop a behavior plan around that particular behavior. So what we would probably want to do is teach her when it's appropriate to access it and when it's not, and then give her some alternatives and some ways of communicating as your what we call replacement behaviors to do instead.
So given that she's 8 and she's been through, it sounds like she's received some speech services, she's acquired some vocal speech, and she's just hitting a delay. Again, when I was saying earlier, at 2, the difference between a developmentally disabled 2-year-old and a typically developing 2-year-old is relatively narrow. At 8, she's developing some skills, but it doesn't sound like she's developed the language repertoire that a typically developing an 8-year-old might have. So I think that exactly what he was saying, making it easier for her to communicate in some way, whether it's if you think you might know what she wants, and providing objects or icons for her to use. I noticed a lot of the kiddos here, a lot of the kids I work with, use either PECs or some kind of assistive technology to communicate. That's not necessarily going to impede further development in vocal speech. It's just a support. As long as you keep working on the language acquisition will continue. It's just kind of a bridge. I've worked with a lot of kids where they didn't have the word yet, and as a result, there were 4 or 5 things they might want, and we had to guess. And if we guessed wrong, we got pinched, we got kicked, we were bitten. Once we could communicate to them, just let me know what you want, I can make it happen, that was the starting point. And then working on things like a behavior plan where we're focusing on things like, not right now, you have to wait, or in 10 minutes, it'll be okay. And it would be a slow process, but I think it's one that is that ABA can absolutely support.
So the reason that your daughter pinches is that sometimes she gets what she wants following the pinching. And that's because when the child is screaming at you or upset, and you just, like Gretchen described, and just give them the candy, that reinforces your behavior because the child stops being upset. None of us want to see our children upset. So what I would also tell you is whenever she pinches you or emits the behavior that you don't want, she cannot get access to that preferred item no matter what at that point.
And I would also say, too, it sounds like if you're giving her the direction no and she's laughing, then your attention to her behavior could also be supporting. So I would even maybe just try not even saying no, so restricting access and just ignoring her for a short period of time, and then kind of representing an opportunity for her to ask when it is appropriate.
In an appropriate way. Yeah.
In an appropriate way. So her question is, can you get it through the state? So depending on where you live, services for ABA are delivered in different ways. So here we have the Regional Center support services for kids under 3, and other counties and states do things different way, but there's also the behavioral health component to health insurance, which is another way that people will pay for ABA services.
Hi, I'm a parent of an older 1P36. He's going to be 18 next month. He just started getting ABA services a couple of months ago when he got suspended from high school. He's going to be a senior next year. And you touched a little bit on this. The people that are supplying the ABA or providing it for him, they're young and they don't really seem to know what they're doing from what I can tell. And the other reason I didn't know that is because they've never trained us. They've never talked to me, except for the initial interview. They worked with him for 6 months, but they've never talked to us since. They just give me the updates. I try to look for a private one, and that's my question. I live in a very small county in the middle of California. There's not a lot of services. I can't find, I called somebody in Anaheim. I guess there's a provider. I kind of called around. I've traveled to San Jose and LA. They're both about 4 hours from where I live. How do you go about finding a private ABA provider to come to your house if you're not satisfied with what the county's providing to you? I'm willing to pay the cash or maybe go through my insurance. I guess it's a new mandate that I read about for the autism. That they have to provide it for you, but it doesn't matter if you can't find one.
Some of the larger companies will actually send therapists to different locations to work with children or individuals, even if you're in a remote area and there's not an agency right there. But I would kind of maybe backtrack first and just kind of try to get some more information about, like, so who's the case manager for your son's service? Is it supported by the school district still? Is it a district staff?
It's the county.
The county. So have you expressed your concern to the case manager? Like said, we really feel like we're not getting training, we're not seeing progress. We would like to have a meeting to discuss what's going on. Because you still have a right to call a meeting and access services if he's receiving services, and you could, kind of start there with that immediate, and maybe if you just speak up, you might be able to get a visit from the program supervisor just to kind of get the ball rolling and see how things are going. That might be a quicker route for you if you haven't tried that yet.
No, I haven't. I just, I met with the highest supervisor, and there's only one of him, and everybody else is, sounds like it's a early program in our area. So I just wanted to kind of speed things up and get a private one.
Yeah, I'd find out who the BCBA is and talk to that person about what your concerns are. My suggestion to you, because the field is in high demand right now, there's more kids that need services than there are providers, is to do your best to work with the provider that you do have before you try to shop around.
Is that going to run out? His services, his IEP runs out when he's 18, and that's next month.
22.
22?
Yeah, but it's paid for by the county or by the school district.
Okay, we have time for one last question. Oh, did you have one more thing to add? Okay.
I kind of had two questions. One, oh, right. One was, my daughter, wherever we go, reaches and just grabs cups, ice, food off of people's tables, into people's purses. And I go through all the steps of being consistent, of being like, no, and her getting in trouble for it. But it does not matter. It doesn't click. Nothing I've tried works. Do you guys have any suggestions for that? As well as me and her father aren't together, and he doesn't see her very often. But when he does, like, her whole demeanor goes down, and she like cries and doesn't want to go. I'm just torn on, do I make her go? Because now she's 5. She's not a baby anymore, so she knows the difference. So do I make her go? Or do I just make him come and visit for a few hours and then go home, type of a thing?
Easy question. I think anybody can take this.
So we work a lot with families where there's divorce in the family, there's separation, and the challenge of getting both households to be consistent in the same way is kind of an endless challenge. We've had situations where a judge has actually ordered both parents to meet with us, and the judge himself is reviewing each individual parent's follow-through, and it still doesn't quite get to that level of consistency. So I don't know, in terms of the legal side of things, however the custody arrangement is set is going to need to be honored depending on how much that can be negotiated. But if there's intervention services in one environment, there needs to be, I would say, at least an attempt to mirror them in the other environment, just for that consistency point that we've been speaking to. And without that, you start to see, we talked earlier about relationship. The relationships start to fall apart. Dad might start getting resentful of, why is she only doing this with me? Or you're resentful because Dad's saying she's perfect there, but not with you. and you might be thinking, Dad never makes her do anything. So some type of consistency needs to be established, whether that means visitation because you can coach or someone else can coach the intervention strategies. But going back to grabbing things, we talked earlier about intermittent reinforcement. So that's just life. And if you have a kid who goes around and is reaching into stuff and you block it or prevent it 80% of the time, probably still going to try because 20% of the time she's getting something for her efforts. So we work a lot on what we would consider just managing proximity. So, walking in the middle of the aisle in the shopping, in the store so that she's not in arm's length of anything that she could grab. And then reinforcing heavily for, that was a great shopping trip. You didn't grab anything, you didn't touch anything, you didn't engage in the inappropriate behavior. And we've had some success, especially at 5, that by the time they're a little bit older, we can have them bumping up to people in line and not grabbing stuff out of their purse. So it's absolutely a process.
And the other thing I would say is find something that she really likes and can be engaged with, so that would distract her, if you will, from reaching in other people's purses, particularly if it's a sensitive time.
So like an example of that would be like if she really likes purses and she likes to reach into things, maybe she could carry her own purse with some things in it that are appropriate for her to be able to handle and use. Like when you are, out in a store and at the age of 5, carrying a little purse is very socially appropriate. It's cute. Like a lot of little 5-year-old girls are carrying a little purse. So that also would kind of, look at the social aspect of the behavior also. It's hard for kids to sit quietly in a shopping cart or a stroller and just sit there and do nothing. So having something appropriate that they can do in place that they enjoy could really help that.
Thank you. I know it's short time. We have the same issue. We live in a remote area. When we went to our the gal that helps dole out all the services, and Christopher is on Medicaid, but they told us when we're getting to this point, our only option was to move somewhere else. I'm going, good grief. So, is there a website available that helps to coach in this area? Give us some ideas, some basic exercises, like you say with the purse with the little girl that's always reaching for things or something of that sort. Is there a resource of that for those of us that live remotely and can't afford to move?
Yeah, so Matt's saying Autism Speaks. I think it's .org. Is it .org? So that's autismspeaks.org. Did you hear that? So that would be and the reason that we would be referring you to an autism website is not because we're saying that your children have autism. We know that their diagnosis is clearly unique. But autism services, ABA follows autism, and ABA, it's a cycle. Autism and ABA go together. So if you're looking at autism resources, you're probably going to find links to ABA.
There's lots on YouTube and training videos. There's a lot on YouTube for training videos and so forth, and online. I can't point you to a specific one, but Autism Speaks gathers all those resources that are credible, that other parents are recommending. They have a really powerful parent group because there's so many children on the spectrum, and all those links I would follow, and because I can't think of one off the top of my head, but that would be where I'd start.